Welcome to part 2 of my Rainbow Six operator guide. Today I'm going to be talking about Pulse. When I first started playing Siege at the launch back in December 2015, Pulse was my crutch op. I was pretty terrible at the game and Pulse was really the first op that I started to go positive with. So I do believe he's pretty good for new players, but there are also a lot of things that you should know about him before jumping right in. So let's take a look at his loadout. So the first primary that Pulse has that I'll be talking about is the UMP45. Since the submachine gun and assault rifle changes UB made in patch 5.2, the UMP45 has quickly become one of my favorite SMGs to handle. Despite its low rate of fire, the UMP more than makes up for it with its respectable damage output and effectively non-existent recoil. Every bullet fired from the UMP does considerable damage at medium to long ranges, and in my experience has the ability to actually contend with many of the attacker's assault rifles. Unlike many of the guns in Rainbow Six Siege, the UMP is highly customizable, as it is able to equip every NATO sight, save the ACOG, both types of grips, and can take every single barrel attachment there is in the game. Because of the extremely low recoil on the UMP45, I would recommend taking the heavy barrel on it and your choice of grip, though in my experience I've found that I prefer the angled grip. Essentially, I view the UMP45 as a jack-of-all-trades kind of weapon. It's what you'd normally take in Pulse, unless you have a particular strategy in mind. Speaking of strategic weaponry, Pulse also has the option to take the M1014 semi-automatic shotgun. If you're interested in doing some wallbanging, I'd suggest taking the M1014. Prior to the giant shotgun nerf update, the M1014 was what I'd always take on Pulse. But these days, it's not nearly as effective as it once was. Due to the mediocre damage, range, and destructibility of the M1014, I'd recommend mostly using it just for wall banging or floor banging people from above or from below. I'd also consider using the M1014 for sneaky ambush pulse style tactics, which the shotgun really complements, especially in some of the smaller maps. Like all shotguns in Rainbow Six Siege, I'd recommend the laser sight to help increase the range of your hipfire on the M1014, and I definitely recommend taking a sight on the shotgun due to the severity of the vertical kick when the weapon is fired in ADS mode. Between Pulse's selection of primaries, I'd have to go with the UMP45 in most cases, though the M1014 does have its uses, particularly on smaller maps, though I wouldn't take the M1014 on maps with a lot of wide open space or long corridors like Bank or Brightly University, unless I'm playing a particular strategy that involves the shotgun. Like all of the FBI operators, Pulse has the option between the USP and the MUSOC. In my experience, I found the MUSOC to be superior than the USP, but that's simply because the USP has a very odd recoil pattern. Both handguns are good options to take, as it's more of a question of whether you want more bullets or more damage. Between these two handguns, I usually choose the MUSOC due to the higher damage it has, because I usually switch to my handgun in panic situations, and in those situations I want to take out the guy I'm fighting. But I can understand the USG being an option as well, because a lot of people believe higher capacity is better, because it allows them to get out of sticky situations, as they have more bullets to suppress their enemy with, and they can engage more targets at once if more targets do show up. In terms of the attachments you can put on the handguns, I'd always recommend a laser sight and a muzzle brake, though that's entirely up to you. So let's take a look at Pulse's secondary gadgets. In Siege, Pulse has the decision to make between 2 barbed wire and a single nitro cell. Specifically in the case of Pulse, I'd always recommend taking a nitro cell on him due to the way in which it synergizes with his pulse scanner. However, there are certain scenarios where barbed wire is more important, and if you notice that your team does not have that much barbed wire, I'd recommend taking it for the team, because you can never really have enough barbed wire. And ambushing people by allowing them to enter your barbed wire and then wall banging them can be a lot of fun. So I've compiled a list of the things that you should not do with Pulse if you want to be successful with him. Number 1, don't rely on your scanner too much. Something I see a lot of new players do is they'll just open up their scanner and have it open the entire game, only to take it out when they're about to kill someone. This is something you should avoid, as having your scanner out severely limits your mobility, and as a result you can't really check as much area as you normally would be able to. The scanner itself has very limited range anyways, it's only 9 meters, so you should only really be using it to check inside of the building and on walls and windows to see if the enemy is repelling. The scanner is only really there to give you and your team an idea of where the enemy is. So don't run around with your scanner out too long, otherwise you run the risk of running either into an IQ or into an ambushing party with your pants down. The scanner isn't the only way for you to get intel. You can still hear things when you have your scanner out, and you can still check cameras periodically. This is what you should be doing with Pulse. The scanner is just an added benefit. Number 2. Don't tunnel vision. In 6 Siege, it's very easy to tunnel vision as Pulse, especially when you find out the locations of an enemy or a group of enemies. My advice for you here would be to not get overly aggressive once you find out the location of an enemy. If you don't know the general location of the rest of your enemy's teammates, then it isn't always worth the risk of running out and getting the one guy that you've spotted on your scanner. In some scenarios, the enemy team will already know your location as well, so it's a good idea to not just run out and YOLO, because they might be waiting for you, or there might be a claymore prepped and ready at the foot of the windowsill you're about to step out of. Number 3. Don't use the scanner too often. So I've told you not to rely on your scanner too much and hold it out for too long, but the opposite is also something you should avoid. When Pulse opens and closes his scanner, a very distinct noise can be heard by the enemy team from a considerable distance. At times, this sound can give away your position, and if you're opening and closing your scanner very often, the enemy team has a higher likelihood of knowing where you are. To combat this, I'd suggest reading up on how sound propagates in this game, and I'd also recommend that you avoid using your scanner in wide open locations and near open windows. So now that we've talked about some of the things that you shouldn't do with Pulse, let's move on to positioning and tactics. In Rainbow Six Siege, operators such as Buck and Fuse specialize in taking the floor directly above the objective site in an attempt to kill the operators present inside. Pulse is the natural counter to operators such as these, as his scanner, his nitro, and his shotgun work in tandem to both pinpoint the location of the attackers above and to take them out quickly and efficiently. When playing Pulse on site, make sure to also scan other locations where you think enemies can be and to notify your team that enemies are playing from above. Another thing to keep in mind when playing Pulse in this manner is that you can make floor kill holes from below in the preparation phase so that when the enemies do enter the floor above you, you can take them out quickly without having to switch from your scanner. You can combine this tactic with putting barbed wire on the floor above you at the entrances, so as soon as they enter you'll hear the rustling, they'll be slowed down enough that you'll be able to swap from your scanner to your primary and take them out quickly and efficiently. Another thing to keep in mind if you exhaust your nitro when playing Pulse from below is that if you have another teammate with nitro, you can merely direct him to where the opponent is by using your scanner and hopefully they'll get the kill. Playing Pulse in this manner is particularly effective in the archive site on Consulate and the train room in Cafe Dostoyevsky. The Pulse is excellent at defending objective sites with destructible ceilings. It should also be noted that Pulse is no slouch when it comes to defending top floor objectives with no access aside from windows. On top floor objectives, Pulse is particularly useful as he can tell his teammates which windows are occupied and which ones are clear. Furthermore, if an enemy operator is idling near a window for too long, Pulse can nitro them or the windowsill and hopefully get a pig. Something else you should keep in mind when playing Pulse on second floor objectives with only window access is that since he can scan windows of enemy presence, he can also re-barricade the ones that do not have enemies on them anymore. So let's move on to some tips about roaming with Pulse. Because of Pulse's scanner, his weapon loadout, and his 3-speed status, he makes a naturally good roamer. In my experience, I have found Pulse to be a particularly effective roamer when playing one floor below from the objective site, or one floor above from the objective site. Typically in Rainbow Six Siege, the attackers will enter from the same level flooring as the objective site itself, so if you're playing as Pulse, one floor below, you'll usually be able to scan the enemies from above you and give callouts to your team. For Furthermore, if the floor is destructible, you can play from below just like you would if you were playing with a destructible ceiling above you. From my experience, playing Pulse from below seems to be more effective due to the way that Nitro works, but playing from above can also work. So let's talk about barbed wire traps. In 6 Siege, one of the most fun things you can do as Pulse is place barbed wire in a common avenue for the attackers to take, and camp on the other side of a wall that is destructible. When an attacker enters your barbed wire and you hear the rustling, it's pretty much over. You just wallbang him from the other side and hopefully get yourself a pick. Another kinda cheap, campy Pulse strategy you can do is what I like to call the runout tactic. When doing this tactic, you simply have to camp a high traffic window or door and just scan as enemies approach. Effectively, what you can do is you can 2-hit the bottom of the window and then vault out and take the guy out, or you can wait and be patient until your opponents start firing and has to reload, and then you can jump out and get them. One location which I really like to use this strategy on would be the workshop location in Border by the window in the adjacent room to the site. Here I just wait for the attackers to push the window and shoot at my friends who are in the room, and once they run out of bullets, I just jump out and get them. So all in all, I believe Pulse to be a good starting operator for new players. However, he does have a lot of nuance associated with him as well. Something else to keep in mind when playing Pulse is that your life is more valuable than certain operators on your team. Unlike Rook and Jaeger, who have passive gadgets, Pulse has an active one, which means that if he does die early, it is more of a detriment to your team than someone whose gadget continues to work even after the operator's death. So as such, try to keep yourself alive as long as possible, because the pulse scanner can be more useful later on in the round. So thank you for joining me for part 2 of my Rainbow Six Siege operator guide. I will be making much more very soon, so stay tuned and maybe leave a like, a suggestion, or even subscribe.